So here's one of my paintings. It's a classic sunlit scene, and even though the scene itself is cartoony, the light is actually fairly realistic, or at least it's based in reality, much like the Sargent painting was. So what I want to do now is recreate part of this painting and kind of narrate what's going on in my brain as I choose all these colors. So here we are in Photoshop, and I just want to quickly turn this into a line drawing. Of course, I could put a layer over top and just trace back a line drawing to work from. But here's just a quick tip for those of you who are looking to do studies from existing paintings and you don't want to waste time doing a line drawing first. Just grab the part that you want to turn into a line drawing and just go up to filter, in Photoshop anyway, go up to filter, stylize, find edges, and it'll kind of create this haphazard line drawing for you. I am going to just grab an airbrush here with a white color and just kind of brush out some of these dots and textural things that it picked up on that I really don't need to see. And then if I want, I can just grab just any kind of line brush and just sort of define, in this case, where this monster goes. Okay, and I'll take away this line here, which delineated some of the light and shadow, but I want to talk you guys through all that as I paint. So there we go. Now at least I can stay faithful to the design of the monster, and you can see what we're doing here. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is just crop into the area that I'm actually painting, and then on my layers here, I'll just set that layer to multiply mode, throw a layer underneath it, and then I will just paint on this layer. So I'm only going to use one layer, which means you don't need to see the layers window. If I ever do make a layer for some reason, I'll definitely let you know. So you know what, for this, let's approach this in a different way than we did the painting in chapter 1. I'm going to approach this like I did the painting in chapter 2, where I did the kindergarten art kind of thing, where we start with local colors. Well, we had the green tree in chapter 2. Here we have a green monster. Let's make him green. I do not care right now about the color temperature. I don't care about these charts. I will in a second, but not yet. All I care about is the most basic consideration that my 19-month-old daughter could do. He's a green monster. Let's make him green. So let's just pick. I just picked that green basically at random. There was no thought process behind why this green. I mean, look, it could be this green too. It doesn't matter. Let's make him this green. Have different greens in there if you want. It doesn't matter right now. Also, he is standing on some sand, which is orangey, like this maybe. So we get this. He is standing in front of a cave, which is what? Maybe a little darker and a bit grayer? I don't know. Is this the color of a cave wall? Maybe a bit darker. I'm not thinking about light and shadow, by the way. I'm simply just guessing at local color. This is intended to look bad right now. This fosters the idea of finding your painting as you work, rather than thinking you need something finished at every step. In fact, that's one of the things I really rebel against in my art for many years now. But I used to think the opposite way. I used to think that every step of the way should look like it's done. You could work like that, but I find it better for your sanity, really, if you allow yourself a process that allows you to find it as you work. So, okay, there's my monster. Let's just get a little color here for the eyes. And while we're at the whites, he has some white shiny teeth, which look like this. And he has some reddish lips. So let's just sprinkle in some of this red for the lips. I just chose a random red color. I'm not thinking about light and shadow yet. I will obviously narrate the thoughts in my head when I start doing that, which is right now, because we are finished with our rough-in. Okay, so our painting now looks terrible, and it looks just like our kindergarten tree did in the last chapter. Okay, great. The first consideration that you always need to make, doesn't matter what you're painting, is where is the light coming from, and what is the light source? Well, in this case, the answer is the sun is the light source, and it's going to be coming in from here. It's going to be in front of the monster, so let me just draw like a 3D arrow. It's going to be like coming in like that, right? The sun direction is there. So I'm imagining that the monster is kind of inside a half cave. Here, I have my painting here. There will be a shadow thrown over the top of the monster, and as if the cave continued above his head, right? And the sun just kind of slices in there. So sometimes what I like to do right at the outset is just grab an airbrush or any brush. This is my marker brush that comes with the class. I'll set it to, say, multiply mode, which is a darkening mode, and just go, okay, the light's coming in here. Let's just throw all of this in shadow. The nice thing about this process right now is I'm, again, not thinking about color. Like, I'll just throw it into a purple color just to prove I'll just pick any color. It doesn't matter. I'm just thinking about value. I'm thinking that the sun is going to come in and slice this bit of light like this. So all of this is shadow, and underneath him is shadow, and the cave is going to be in shadow here. Change color just to show you that I'm not really caring about color. This already now gives me a bit of a lighting effect because it's value that affects the appearance of form and light, not color. Color only piggybacks on accurate lighting and values. And even though these values are kind of a mess, like look at all that scribbly nonsense on the monster, at least it's still a overall darker passage and an overall lighter passage here for the light. It's very clear to say like this is light, L for light, and this is shadow. Okay, so that's a good first step. I'm going to get out of multiply mode now. Let's just get a regular brush like this. This is my dry brush, by the way, that also comes with this class and all my classes. And now, okay, let's start thinking about actual color choices. I'm going to start thinking about chart number 2 here because the monster is green. So we are going to go from warm to cool through the greens because, monster's green. We're going to be dealing with greens. Let's get a warmer green, which is pretty easy. It's on the warmer side of green. Anything in here will work. Doesn't matter if it's that green or that green or that green. It'll all work because it's on the warmer side. I said there was no rhyme or reason to the green I put down, which is true. But what's actually kind of nice about what I did here, and I should point it out, I did it by accident, but what's kind of nice is it's sort of in the middle. Like I could go cooler green or I could go warmer green. This is not something you have to do, but maybe sometimes it is nice if you're going to lay down local colors first to kind of put your color in the middle of the temperature spectrum so you can go either way. For example, if you're putting a purple local color, it might be helpful to pick your purple about there because then you can go warmer purple by sliding up toward the red or colder purple by sliding down toward the blue. And that holds true for any color on the spectrum. So I'm going to pick my green in light, warm it up by sliding it down there because the bully sunlight is going to be hitting this guy. The sun is on the warmer side. And let's just raise the value because after all, it's in light. And let's put it in. Now already, this is different from how I approached my painting in chapter 1, where I started with grays. And I'm kind of going against my own advice. There are no rules to any of this stuff. Like when I tell you a piece of advice, it's only advice. It's not a rule. Right now, I'm doing something different than I did in chapter 1. In chapter 1, I said start grayer and add color, branch off with saturation from there. Here I'm saying, okay, I know that this is going to be like one end of my, if I'm looking at chart number 2, I'm kind of picking my one side of the chart. I know that my green is going to be warm somewhere around here. That's actually kind of close to what I had. I'm going to put it down there because I have good reason to believe that this will be one end of my chart. And also what I'm going to do is just with my layers, I'm just going to reduce the opacity on this line layer and then I'm going to merge it down. So I'm only working on that one layer right now. Okay, so the sun is coming in, hitting this guy. You don't just need one color. Choose different colors, I like to use the smudge tool a lot. My settings are in Photoshop anyway, a strength of 93%, and I have the finger painting option turned on. The finger painting option, by the way, just means that I can paint with the color I have selected. So like if I select this blue, you see the blue goes down and then it smudges. If finger painting is off, it only smudges, which is also useful, but most of the time I have finger painting turned on. And this is how I can create, in this case, edges that are appropriate for like a furry character like this guy is. All right, now I want to, get a few different kinds of colors in there. And while we're in the light, let's start thinking about the halftone value. Remember, halftone is where the form is turning away from the light. So if he's got like a round belly, like if his belly is like a sphere that is round, as that sphere starts turning away from the light, in other words, turning under, but it's still in the light. It hasn't turned under enough to be in shadow yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to warm up that green even more. These colors that I'm putting down here are decidedly not green at all. I'm venturing truly away from the greens. This is not green. This is what, orange or yellow or whatever color you think that is. It still is okay because it's in the context of temperature. That is, this is a warm light warming up this green. As long as I have some actual greens in here, I could offset that with other warm colors and it's just fine. And by the way, if you just want to see my original again, you can see, look how I've pushed it even more. Look how reddish orange that is. I'd still call this like my block-in stage. By no means is it final. Not that I'm going to tighten this up with fine detail or anything, but I do kind of arrive at my finished strokes as I go. So I think some nice bright. These are like yellows now, which is just adjacent to green, right? It's like right next to green on the color wheel. And that's very common for a bully sunlight to push a green to yellow. That's kind of the magic part. This monster will read as green because it's going to span the gamut of greens. You don't need the whole thing just to be green for it to look green. I'm going to do another chapter on this class. In fact, it'll be the next chapter, chapter 4, on flat colors and how you can augment them. Okay, now I want to think about what's going on in the shadows of this guy. So I'll stay on the smudge tool just for fun. And I want to be in the cooler range. It may help, by the way, just to sample where you're at. In Photoshop, when you have the smudge tool active, I can't push Alt and get my eyedropper. It's really annoying. So I got to click that, sample my green, and this is where I'm at. And okay, that's good. This is already now a colder green than what I have in the light. And this is an important place for me to pause here and mention that because I just put in this warmer stuff for the sunlight, these warmer greens or these warmer colors, I now have a comparison. My kindergarten block-in, that green monster, green color, is now actually divided into warm family and cooler family. This is good. This is what painters do. So the green I put down is now reading as cool. It didn't read as cool until I had the warmer light. You need something to compare it to. Remember, color is always moving. Chapter 1 stuff, right? So I'm going to put in some of this reflected light. Now, on a form level, again, I mentioned that his belly is like a ball, like a round ball. Well, if this part of the belly turned under, this part is turning up. And when it turns up, it's going to be exposed to that skylight. So going back to our color chart, looking at chart number 2, I'm moving this way in the hue wheel, going toward blue. I'm in Photoshop here, I'm going up this way. But I don't necessarily want to keep the same saturation. I could, but it starts looking a bit candy-coated, just not so subtle when you keep the same level of saturation. So that's where chart number 3 comes in, combining charts number 2 and 3. So as I move this way toward blues, I will also incorporate these little grays in the middle. So let's decrease that saturation, like I said, and go up toward the blue and put these in. I'm basically going the opposite way that I did in chapter 1, where I started with grays and building out. I've started here with saturated colors and I'm building in toward gray. I got to build my grays into this. But here's the thing. I don't just have to stay here. I'm going to bounce up to these purples. Why? Well, it's still a colder color. Remember, my warms on the monster are here, right? Like deeply rooted in the warm area of the color wheel. I could go cooler by going up here, which I was just doing. I could also go cooler by going here, combining chart 1 in with chart 2, in with chart 3. I want to quickly pause the demonstration and show you on a color wheel what I'm doing, because it's important that we see it both on these charts as well as on the color wheel. I blocked in my overall local color green somewhere in here, and remember I said that was in the middle of the warm greens and the cool greens. That's nice because it gives me the ability to go either way. Now, when I did this sunlight area here, the sun being a warm bully light, starting from this green, I obviously want to go warmer. I used chart number 2 to do that. So if we look at chart number 2, my block-in green might have been around there. I simply went that way, which is the same thing I just drew on the color wheel. So that's chart number 2. A quick point on moving through hues like that. It can sometimes be dangerous to keep the same saturation. So again, I started with that green and I ended up around here, keeping the same saturation as I went. That can be dangerous because, like I said earlier, it can be a bit gaudy or just overly desperately colorful, which is something you generally don't want in your paintings. Now, in my opinion, where you can get away with that is when the hues are close together. These two hues, not a whole lot of distance between them, they're neighbors. In color theory speak, you would say these are analogous colors. When colors are side by side, generally speaking, you can get away with using the same level of high saturation. Now, if you wanted to go, say, from this color to this color, and you went like this, the complete chart number 2, that would likely be too much color. It would look too candy-coated. Again, something you don't want unless you're literally painting candy, I suppose. Okay, so that's how I'm managing the transition into the light side. So now that I'm in my light side, I'm over here, and in my demonstration, you see this area right in there? I'm kind of here on the color wheel. Notice how those cool colors are much closer to gray than the warm colors. I'm using chart number 4's path, which, as you remember from earlier in this chapter, is kind of like this S-curvy thing. And because I'm aware of that curve, I can just plot colors along it. So for example, when you're painting, you don't have to literally put every single one of these colors. That's not a requirement. You should know about this path, but if you want, you can say put this color and then put this color in your paintings like I did, and then kind of say, okay, along the way now I kind of owe my painting this color and maybe this color here to kind of give the viewer this path. But also remember, I'm combining charts, so I could also give the viewer a little bit of chart number 2, like this. That's totally okay to combine charts like that. Obviously, when you are combining charts, it makes the calculation that much more complex, but as long as you're aware of what you're doing and you're applying your personal taste to it, which gets more sophisticated with practice and experience, you can do it. Okay, but back to following chart number 4's path here. Let's go back to our 2 colors. Just these 2 colors alone is not enough to tell the viewer that it's chart number 4. You have to fill in some of the blanks. And my point is, you don't have to fill in all the blanks, just enough to give the viewer a little visual nudge saying, hey, I'm following this path. That's what'll make your color movement identifiable to the viewer. So back to the demo, I'm putting in this crazy purplish color, which at first glance appears to make no sense. But I'm using chart number 1 in combination with chart number 3 to get the grayed down purple. And then all that is in combination with chart number 2 and 3. So you folks probably know I use a lot of color in my paintings, and I get a lot of questions like, how do you do it? Well, this is how I do it. I'm not afraid to combine these charts often. Maybe I'll stick with chart number 1 and 3 here and try some purpley blues, keeping it, relatively on the gray side. And by the way, as I put this blue in, right, I'm pressing softly on my tablet, so if I sample that result, well, it's a different color, right? It's mixing the green with that blue I had selected. And, Photoshop tends to gray off colors to a certain degree when you do that. So I'm letting Photoshop do some mixing for me. And I'm saying Photoshop here because that's what I'm using, but any app of your choice will kind of do the same thing. So at the beginning, I told you I was kind of finding my first extreme point of a chart. Well, I may want to go the opposite way and find my other extreme point of the chart. So I may want to take some of these grayish colors that I have here and say, you know what, eventually I kind of want to be about there as my final resting point here in the chart. If you look back at my original piece right here, you can kind of see some of those blues in there, right? See those blues and some of those saturated purples in there? This kind of is my end point of the chart. So I'll be like, okay, let's grab a brush and just scribble in, scumble in is the official art term for that. It makes scribbling sound official when you call it scumbling, and put that in. And I'm mixing it right into my other colors, right? This is all possible because I'm in the right context. These are all conforming to the same kind of movement of the color. These charts indicating the directions my colors are moving in, right? As long as I'm within the context of those charts, it's fine. Here, I'll show you how I can break that in a bad way. If I were working in the light and I wanted to put this blue in the light, well, now I'm breaking away from my chart too much. That blue looks wrong because even though it's kind of the correct value, it just doesn't feel right. There's nothing to motivate that particular temperature change, that extreme temperature change in the light. The light should be bullying these colors to be there in the light. The same is true for shadow, by the way. If I got a red color and started putting it in, it's too big of a jump, that transition. It'd be like, taking this color here and putting it over here. It doesn't work. You absolutely have to maintain your context, which is why doing those palette studies like we did with the Sargent painting earlier is quite a good visual exercise. All right, so let's get back to painting here. I feel like I need some form happening under the mouth. The mouth needs to dip down darker because it's not going to be receiving nearly the same amount of light as the belly. So I've picked a warmer color, but I'm going to cool it off by going grayer and cool it off also by going down this way, just because I don't want to compete with my bully light colors. So I'm doing that, and there's no real reason to use any blues here because, like we saw with the Sargent piece, there's no sky being reflected into the bottom of his chin. You might think, oh, skylight might come down and bounce up, but no, skylight is too weak to do that. Once the skylight hits what it directly hits, that's about it. It's not going to bounce anywhere. Sunlight will bounce. So the sun, for instance, will come down, bounce off the ground, and come up to his underbelly there. In fact, why don't we put some of that in right now? I'll just switch gears here. I'll take the color here. I'm going to get a warmish, something in like this range of the chart, warmish, and also a bit lighter than what's there, and kind of start putting that in because the sun is, being the warmer color that it is going to warm up these greens just a little bit. And I'm just using the smudge tool to put these in. And I can play with some different warms. See, this color was cooler in this context. If I put this color here, it's cooler. But if I put the color there, it's warmer. Because that green, was somewhere much cooler. Always context. Always context. Which color or which colors are beside what you're painting? That's the question you have to ask yourself. So the decisions you make about color are always based on what's around it. So this represents sun coming in, and what I probably should do here is look at the ground. That sun is really going to brighten up both in value and in saturation this ground that he's standing on. So let's put in, it's going to come right up here. There's a shadow that he's casting, so I'll paint around the shadow. The sun is going to be illuminating the sand here, something like this. So now with that information in play, now it really looks like that sun is bouncing up into his underbelly, but it's not finished yet. Again, I'm just blocking all this stuff in. I'm getting it in the ballpark, let's say. That sun bounce that I'm painting here is not going to extend up here. That's where the sky starts to take over. So there is going to be a transition area in here. In that transition area, well, I'll just keep it in the greens because, that is kind of the middle ground between these warms and the cooler sky. So I'll just keep it somewhere in here, scumbling in these shapes of color and value. Maybe go a bit grayer in parts to help these transitions. Like if this red, these warms want to transition to green, like maybe I can gray them off. Slide it a bit up to green, but gray it off. Get the right value though. This is again where the smudge tool helps because the smudge tool can create soft edges as well very easily. That's looking good. Go back into the lights. I'm just bouncing around, just playing around with different color varieties in here. Working this edge where light meets shadow. Making sure though that the shadow is still sufficiently dark enough to be shadow on a value level, right? It still has to be darker than the light. Make sure that when you're putting in these reflected lights, you're not overly lightening the shadow value. That would be bad. Then it'll start looking like light and it'll confuse your drawing entirely. Your painting, your drawing, whatever. When I say painting, I mean drawing. And when I say drawing, I mean painting. They are the same thing. They act based on the same principles. I suppose painting adds color to the equation, but everything else is based on the same philosophy and principles. Playing with these blues here, just continuing the tapestry of color. This is his arm here. His arm is going to be really hit by a lot of the skylight, so I'll even go bluer. I might increase the saturation. So again, working at the edge of one of my color charts here, the extreme other side, as opposed to the yellows over here in the light. I don't want to use this color too much. See, if I have, in the light, I have these very saturated warms. If I have equally saturated colds, it kind of starts feeling not subtle enough, for lack of better terminology. Just like I showed you guys in chapter 1, I tend to keep one of my charts, if we're looking at the color charts, I kind of keep one side extreme, but the other side I might cut off there. Or it could be the opposite. I'll keep the cool side there, but cut the warms off there. It's very rare that I completely span the gamut from one to the other in this extreme form like this. So even though these look cold, they're not that cold, at least not as cold as the warms are warm, if that makes sense. So let's continue back to where I was here, putting in just these transitions. That color I had was too warm. Let's gray it off. I want to create some form of transition here between these darks under the chin, you might call it, and the belly that is getting more reflected light. So I'm just going back to my greens. That's kind of that in-between zone if you're looking at chart number 2, right? Passing through the greens to get from cool to warm. And while we're here, let's throw in some of these sort of greens in the middle between warm and cool in some of these shadows, again, to help with the transition a little bit. And at this point, this is probably the first point in this demo painting here, folks, where I'm like, okay, this is starting to work. This is where the color tapestry is starting to look like it is working, which is a great point to be in your painting, because now it's like, okay, I'm going to adjust the edge. He doesn't look very furry everywhere, so I can adjust some of these edges, but I wouldn't do this finer work until I feel like my colors are starting to communicate the feeling I want them to. I could, by the way, just fast forward some of this and get a linear dodge brush and just put in a little bit more oomph into that light which I think is nice. I remember doing this exact procedure in the original painting as well. Just increasing the dramatic flare, if you will, on some of these areas. You can even paint light with this like this. Let's continue on. Let's look at the side of the cave. There will be some light hitting the cave. Like if you look at my original again, light comes in slicing through the creature, and then, the creature casts this shadow, but some of that cave is still in light. So we can just get some of that. And again, this is pretty easy in terms of ballparking my color. I know it's a warmer sun. I've told the viewer it's warmer by my comparison between warm and cool greens on the monster. So all I got to do now is pick my base color here. Let's warm it up a little bit. Saturation too. And obviously raise the value for light and just end up somewhere around there. And I'll paint that in. And that's a great starting point. I know it's, if not the final color, I know it's at least accurate in context. In the terms of the direction the color's moving, I know it's going to be correct. And then I can just work from there. That's the thing where color becomes kind of fun. A lot of people are scared of color at first. But once you get this whole context thing and the direction of color thing, and you divorce yourself from thinking that there is a quote unquote right color for things, there isn't. It's only the right context. Color becomes very freeing. Anyway, what I'm doing now is I'm just painting some ambient occlusion behind the character. So yeah, back to the light side of the cave here. And again, speaking of context, I could warm it up a little bit more if I wanted, scumble some of that in. But guess what? I can cool it down. Why don't I cool it down by going up this way, chart number 2, and gray this way, chart number 3, combining 2 and 3, right? And just put some of that in. Keeping the correct value, of course, so that I kind of can put these colors in with impunity. I don't have to worry about repercussions of the wrong color because I have the right value and I have the right context of color. I don't want to go too cold. Like I don't want to do this. That breaks context. That's too cold. That color might look good in shadow, which is supposed to be colder. I can put in some of these colors in shadow and start building the reflected light coming from the sky, which is off screen. Of course, in the original painting, the sky was on screen and you can see it really informing the blues in the cave that's facing the sky there. So that's all I'm thinking about. The light won't have those blues because those blues are part of the shadow. The skylight is not strong enough to influence the sunlight. The sun is the strongest bully that there is. The sun will completely eradicate any trace of skylight, leaving it only in the realm of shadow. Just playing with the edge where the cliff meets the sand here. And then you can do any kind of detail on this cliff or this rock face that you want, but that's not really part of this demo. I may put a little bit in at the end, but I'm, in terms of painting detail, you can go wild with that. Let's get back to the topic at hand here, which is colors. Let's go to the eyeballs. I feel like the eyeballs haven't been touched at all. There is also going to be ambient occlusion there. So I'll pick let's say an overlay airbrush, and let's get a darker color and just darken down this eye socket. I would consider this ambient occlusion as well. Ambient occlusion being the darkest part of the shadow, the part where the ambient light cannot get to. Okay, the eyeball will get some light from the sky. It's very gray. I'm kind of like here on my color chart, so I can easily just kind of pop out into the blues here and just get some reflected light from the sky in those eyeballs. And might as well throw in just a little highlighty thing while we're here. In this case, it's just reflections of the sky. All right, let's continue painting. This is kind of a warmish green. Not as warm as it is in the light, though. Still in the realm of shadow. Gonna define some of the form of the head here using this sort of, again, this middle temperature green. It's neither warm nor cool based on the two extremes that I have. It's somewhere in the middle. And that's the nice thing. When you establish your extremes a bit early on, you then can play and flesh out that middle area. Whereas in chapter 1, again, we went the opposite way. We started with if you look at these charts, in chapter 1, we would have started with the middle of the chart and expanded outward. Here, I've established my two extremes, and I'm working inward. I don't use one approach over the other. I use them both interchangeably. It really depends on the project and also what you're comfortable with. Another nice thing about the smudge tool in this case, and other softwares have their own version of the smudge tool, I can pick a pretty extreme blue like this, but when I paint it, Photoshop will mix it in, right? So I'm painting that extreme blue, but when I sample the result, it's like there. So sometimes it's helpful to know what the software is going to do when it mixes colors, and that just comes with experience. And that way you can kind of overshoot your color temperature and let your software mix it for you. The nice thing about Photoshop's smudge tool, and I think other softwares are like this, you put down one stroke and it's pretty pure. Whereas if you put that one stroke in and keep your stylus held down, it'll kind of smudge it and mix it into what's already there and kind of bring it closer to what's already there as well. So in that way, the smudge tool is great for these little mini transitions. All right, so I'm going to speed up the video for the rest of this demonstration. This is only sped up 3 times. The reason I'm doing this is I've already explained everything I'm doing as far as chapter 3 is concerned. All that remains to be done is give the painting a little bit more refinement in terms of its brushwork and stuff, and maybe a few more little color patches here and there to ease over transitions, maybe paint away stuff that I feel is too garish or too exaggerated, and, just bring this painting to something a little bit more complete for this demonstration. Here, for example, I'm adding some of the ambient occlusion that would shroud the top of his head, also the eye sockets, ambient occlusion there as well, refining some of the irises, just little things. Here in the shadows underneath the monster, that's a pretty warmish gray that I used, so now I can use chart number 4 to jump me into more of the blues. Again, not plotting every color along the way, but plotting just enough colors that there is some color movement there. One thought I just had while literally watching this demonstration being played back in front of me is that the more major the area, maybe the more colors you want to plot along a certain path in a given chart, whereas minor areas like the little shadow under the monster, for instance, maybe you only need to plot 2 or 3 colors for it to be sufficient. You can see that exact thing happening on the monster's belly, for example. That's a pretty major area of this painting, and look at all the colors I'm plotting there to show various movements along the color wheel. I feel like I'm kind of zooming into one of the color charts and really showing the viewer what I'm doing in the belly area versus the cast shadow under the monster and maybe in the cave itself, like I'm painting now. I'm kind of zooming out a little bit of those color charts and just plotting the bare essentials. Color is the most subjective part of painting. It's not like perspective where there's a textbook, literal textbooks on how to draw proper perspective. That doesn't exist with color. I mean, there are textbooks on color too, don't get me wrong. But everything to do with color is mere suggestion. General principles that tend to yield pleasing results. What you owe to yourself as a painter is to know those general suggestions, such as these charts I'm showing you here, enough to be able to make use of them in a cohesive manner. The successful application of that is basically up to your judgment. And, that's where taste comes in. I mean, I've had people, only few people thankfully, but people tell me that I use too much color in my painting. And I'm like, okay, I can see why you're saying that. I don't always use this much color. Like this painting I'm doing here is fairly colorful. I chose the subject because I feel it's a good example of how to use these charts. But you can also use these charts in a minimal way and keep your color very subdued. And of course, I've done that in my paintings too. It's really up to your personality and your aesthetics. And all right, so here's where I ended up with this demo. Again, I chose this subject matter because I think it's a good example of how you can combine different charts in a very obvious way, because this is a pretty colorful painting. Let's now move on to chapter 4 and talk about a different aspect of color that you have to deal with quite often.